HOA Karen hosted a wedding on my ranch, so I unleashed the cows and she dialed 911. Have you ever had a neighbor so audacious, so completely self-absorbed that they believed your private property was merely an extension of their own desires? What happens when their entitlement crosses the line from annoying to outright invasion, forcing you to choose between your peace and a chaotic, unforgettable act of defiance? My ranch, Silver Creek, had been in my family for 3 generations. It wasn't a pristine, manicured estate, but a working ranch with cattle, open fields, and the genuine, earthy smell of the countryside. It was my sanctuary, my livelihood, and my heritage. The closest development was the ironically named Eden Meadows, a collection of McMansions where manicured lawns and HOA regulations reigned supreme. Our boundary was marked by a sturdy, though rustic, barbed wire fence, a clear division between my reality and their suburban fantasy. My nemesis in this ongoing culture clash was Bethany Carmichael, the undisputed queen of Eden Meadows HOA and a woman who saw my ranch not as a vital part of the local ecosystem, but as an unsightly blot on her pristine landscape. Bethany was a woman of immaculate presentation, always perfectly dressed, hairstyled, and a diamond tennis bracelet glittering on her wrist. She exuded an aura of condescending superiority, a belief that her refined tastes should dictate the very air we breathed. Her latest obsession was the unsightly nature of my cattle. She tried everything, demanding I move them to a less visible pasture, impossible given the layout, suggesting I plant a privacy hedge hundreds of feet long at my expense, and even hinting that their natural odors were somehow violating an unwritten HOA covenant. "Mr. Hayes," she'd purred, though her eyes were cold as ice, during a particularly infuriating courtesy visit. "We in Eden Meadows value our aesthetic integrity. Your livestock is simply not in harmony with our vision. They are an unsightly, frankly quite smelly, distraction from the elegance we strive for. I trust you'll find a more appropriate solution, or the HOA will be forced to take measures." Her tone implied that my very existence, and that of my cows, was a personal insult to her delicate sensibilities. She had the air of someone who expected the world to bend to her will. I tried to explain the reality of ranching, the necessary grazing rotations, the simple fact that my cows were here long before her subdivision. I even offered to strengthen the fence and add some native trees as a partial screen, though it would cost me dearly. "Ms. Carmichael," I'd said, trying to maintain my composure, "these are working cattle. They need this land. I'm operating a legitimate business. They're fenced in. There's no legal issue here." She merely waved a dismissive hand, her perfect manicure glinting in the sun. "Legality is one thing, Mr. Hayes. Decorum is another. We're hosting a number of high-profile events this season, and your unsanitary display is simply not acceptable. You'll hear from my lawyer." Her arrogance was boundless, her threats chilling. The threats continued, escalating to legal notices and absurdly large fines for visual pollution and odor violations. I was on the verge of fighting a protracted and expensive legal battle when the unthinkable happened. I had driven into town for supplies, leaving my foreman, old Jebediah, in charge. I'd specifically told him I'd be gone all day. When I returned in the late afternoon, a sight so bizarre, so utterly infuriating, greeted me that I nearly drove off the road. On my largest, most verdant pasture, right next to the fragile barbed wire fence, was a massive white tent, bedecked with flowers, string lights, and tables set for a grand banquet. A string quartet played a jaunty tune, and dozens of impeccably dressed guests milled about, sipping champagne. A wedding, a full-blown, elaborate wedding, was taking place on my pasture. And in the middle of it all, beaming like the hostess of the year, was Bethany Carmichael. She had somehow convinced the happy couple, obviously from out of town, that this was the perfect rustic chic venue, completely ignoring my property rights. My fence, I now saw, had been cleverly disguised with floral garlands and sheer fabric, making it appear as if it were merely a decorative backdrop, or even part of the venue itself. The brazen audacity of it stole my breath. My first impulse was to storm in there, yelling, but a cold, calculated fury settled over me. This wasn't just trespassing, this was a complete, utter disregard for my livelihood, my property, and the sanctity of my home. My cows, usually grazing peacefully in a far-off pasture, were being held back by a temporary electric fence powered by a small generator placed precariously close to the wedding tent. I noticed Jebediah, looking pale and nervous, signaling frantically from the barn. He must have been threatened or bribed to keep quiet. Then a thought, mischievous and powerful, sparked. I knew that particular generator was old and finicky. What if it accidentally failed? This wasn't just a personal slight. I recalled a conversation with old Manuela, a historian from the local university. She'd been researching the unique ecological role of traditional ranching in preserving certain native grass species and supporting endangered local pollinators. My ranch, she'd explained, was a prime example of sustainable land management, a living historical document. Bethany's actions, by treating my land as a disposable backdrop, not only violated my private property but undermined a crucial ecological study that was poised to receive significant federal grants for land preservation. Her petty entitlement was directly threatening a project of public benefit. That added a new layer to my fury, a moral imperative. I strode purposefully towards the temporary fence, my steps hidden by the rising evening shadows. Jebediah, sensing my intent, met my gaze and gave a barely perceptible nod. He knew. With a swift, practiced motion, I cut the power cord to the generator. The humming died. A moment later, a low, collective moo rumbled from behind the temporary fence. Then another. And another. The cattle, curious and feeling the sudden release, began to shift. Panic erupted. The guests, initially confused by the sudden silence of the string quartet, who had stopped playing the moment the cows started moving, soon realized what was happening. A wave of brown and white, several dozen head of curious, hungry cattle began to amble slowly towards the tent, their large bodies swaying, their hooves making soft thudding noises on the grass. "My God!" a woman screamed, pointing. "The cows!" Bethany Carmichael, her face a mask of horror, spun around. "What is happening?" she shrieked, her perfectly coiffed hair starting to wilt in the humid evening air. "This is impossible." They were secured. She locked eyes with me, standing by the now useless temporary fence, a faint, knowing smirk on my face. Her eyes widened in dawning horror. "Mr. Hayes, you fiend! You unleashed them," she wailed, her voice cracking. "This is sabotage. My wedding. My beautiful wedding." She looked absolutely distraught, her carefully constructed illusion of perfection shattering before her eyes. Just then, a sleek black car, not a wedding vehicle, but a county sheriff's SUV, pulled up to the edge of the pasture. Out stepped Sheriff Thompson, a man who knew the difference between a rancher's cow and an HOA president's delusion. With him was Eleanor Vance, the investigative reporter from the Chronicle, looking remarkably unsurprised. I'd given Eleanor a heads up that something might be happening on my ranch that afternoon, knowing she had been following Bethany's increasingly aggressive tactics. She had also been tipped off by a disgruntled planner in the county office about Bethany's attempt to fast-track zoning changes for her Gardenia Estates project, a new, even larger subdivision that would require annexing several parcels of working agricultural land, including parts of my ranch, under eminent domain. This was the real, underlying motive behind all of Bethany's nuisance complaints. My ranch and its cows were simply in her way. "Ms. Carmichael," Sheriff Thompson said, his voice calm but firm, "we've received multiple complaints about unauthorized structures and activities on private property. And I believe that's Mr. Hayes's cattle, isn't it?" He eyed the advancing herd with a practiced rancher's gaze. Bethany, seeing the sheriff and the reporter, completely unraveled. "Call 911. Call 911. She shrieked, fumbling for her phone. "The cows are attacking. They're dangerous." He released them. She sounded utterly hysterical, completely detached from reality. The wedding guests were now in full retreat, tripping over lawn ornaments, scrambling away from the curious bovines. Eleanor Vance stepped forward, holding up her microphone. "Ms. Carmichael, sources within the county planning office indicate you've been secretly pushing for zoning changes to convert agricultural land, including parts of Mr. Hayes's ranch, into new luxury developments. Is this wedding part of a larger plan to establish a precedent for using this land for private events?" She pointed her microphone directly at Bethany, her eyes unwavering. Bethany, caught completely off guard, could only stammer. "No, it's a charity event. For the Save the Rare Orchid Fund," she blurted out, a desperate, transparent lie. Sheriff Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Is that so, Ms. Carmichael? Because I also have a warrant here regarding a series of fraudulent permit applications for event staging on various unowned rural properties. and you're currently standing on Mr. Hayes's property, without his permission, hosting a commercial event. The wedding guests, now safely behind a hedge, stared in shocked silence. This wasn't the quaint country wedding they'd signed up for. Bethany, her face a ghastly shade of green, finally succumbed to a full-blown panic attack. She crumbled to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. The cows, meanwhile, had reached the wedding tent, curiously sniffing the tablecloths and making soft, contented mooing noises, completely unaware of the chaos they had caused. The aftermath was swift and severe. Bethany Carmichael was charged with criminal trespass, destruction of property for the temporary fence, and multiple counts of fraud related to her permit applications and the attempt to misrepresent the land's use. The news of her Cowgate wedding spread like wildfire, a delicious scandal that exposed her arrogant dealings. The HOA board, facing immense public backlash and potential legal action from disillusioned residents, swiftly voted to impeach her and began reviewing all her past directives. Her carefully cultivated reputation as the Queen of Eden Meadows shattered, leaving her socially ostracized and facing significant legal battles. Her Gardenia Estates project was dead in the water, her ambitious land grab exposed and thwarted. For me, there was no triumphant cheer, but a quiet, deep satisfaction. The cows, oblivious to their role in this drama, returned to their normal grazing. My ranch, though briefly invaded, felt more truly mine than ever before. The immediate problem was solved, and a larger injustice was averted. Yet, the question lingered. In a world where entitlement and self-interest so often clash with honest living, what is the most effective way to push back? When is it right to simply stand your ground, and when do you need to unleash a little chaos to bring about justice?